So we're right on the edge of the Wairarapa wind belt, and you would think that it would lessen, but it's probably at its strongest, right on the edge. Like I drive 10 minutes towards Waipark and no wind. And I can drive to Pongaroa, which I say is the windiest place, and I think, geez, it's not too bad out here. Like, we get it hard. My wife said to me the other day that she didn't think that it was quite explained to her enough about the wind before we bought the property. But I think you just end up enjoying the good days. Bit of my history, like Sam was saying, I grew up in Waipukirau. We're on the lifestyle block there. Probably similar size to what we're running now. Both parents worked off farm, and it was borderline whether I was going to school at times, because as a 10-year-old I was running it. So I quite enjoyed that challenge. It was a bit hard to tip sheep over as a 10-year-old, but like I was organising the shearers and doing all the things and making sure all the stock were fed, and so I was chin deep into it pretty early on. Change when I started looking at doing things different, as far as, like Sam was saying, my friend Hamish and I, we grew up together. We seemed to be on this parallel course, whether we were in the same region or whether he's in another island. We seemed to be doing the same things at the same time. And when he started getting into regenerative ag off Christine Jones' visit, wasn't it, a few years ago, and he went there and just challenged everything she said. There's no way this Australian scientist can come over and tell us how to farm. And he finished that day totally mind blown, rung me up. I agreed on a lot of things she'd said. We were sort of basically already both doing the same mindset. So yeah, it's quite fascinating how that goes. And I think I've always questioned how things were done, or how, if someone showed me how to do something, I sort of looked at it and thought, well, yeah, that probably works, but there's got to be a better way. I remember someone showing me how to break a dog, and I thought, that's ridiculous, that's just stupid. Same when someone showed me how to break a horse, and I was like, there's got to be another way. So always started looking at other ways to do things, and I had to understand it before I'd do it myself. I think another thing was I did 2 years casual in the Wairarapa, and basically worked on at least 15 different farms over 2 years, and really opened my mind up to how there were so many different ways of doing things, and I could see people that were doing things and thought they were doing a good job, and I thought I'd drive home and go, should have done it that way, or gee, that was really good, I must take something from there. So a lot of driving to and from places, you weren't asked for your opinion there, you could just jump in the ute at the end of the day, drive away out the gate and go, that's not going to work, or that is going to work. And so it was really good, really awesome learning thing. If anyone gets the chance to do casual for a couple of years, it's pretty cool. Pretty hard way to make a living, but as far as learning, it was unbelievable. In fact, there was a guy that I used to work for, and he ran his sheep system really hard and couldn't understand it, but then his cattle system, totally different. He was probably way ahead of a lot of regen guys in that respect. So he used to have grass, had to be damn near knee high by the 1st of November in Hawke's Bay dry country, and that was his way of getting through the summer. And so he did an amazing job there. And I was at a catchment group about a month ago, and he was bagging off regen farming, and I actually said to him, like, you were a big part of my learning curve into you are doing regenerative farming, you just didn't even realise it. And I don't know whether he's embarrassed or what, I don't know. So yeah, so that's been sort of my journey into it. Main topic for me today is grazing. And I think that, so there's a three-pronged attack that I think we need to all really get right to be successful. And one of them is the soil, and you're probably lucky that's not my main topic, because I'll probably bore you all to pieces. And the other is genetics and stock selection, and the other is your grazing systems. And I think in a three-legged stool, you take one leg out, the thing falls over. So they're all as important as each other, and need a lot of consideration to make sure you're successful. But anyway, rotational grazing and deferred grazing. I think the big thing is how to get into it, and spring is the obvious one where you get grass growth that exceeds animal demand. So it's about picking that right time, and I think becoming outcome focused. So before you start doing any sort of grazing system, you've got to ask yourself why you're doing it and what's your outcome. So we've all got different reasons, there's all sorts of different farming operations, so you've got to be really sure about why you're deferred grazing. So is it to get through a dry summer? Is it to create feed in that summer so that you can then secure autumn feed or even right through to winter feed? Like, where's your focus? What are you doing it for? And that will determine how you go about it. And it gets pretty complicated because everyone will have their own situation. So I think it's really important that you understand your situation before you get into it. You don't just jump in and go, oh, I'm regenerative farming, I'm doing rotational grazing, I'm deferred grazing, look at me, and have absolutely no understanding of what you're actually your outcome's going to be. I can't ratify that anymore. And like I say, spring, grass grows grass. If you let it grow, you grow heaps. And reading the season, hugely important. So you've got to have a few options and wait for the right timing and then select that option. So a bit about paddock selection. Again, have a few options, read the season. When you decide for a deferred paddock, don't take one that's half grazed, because you'll have plants that have been preferentially grazed, and so the poorer plants have already established themselves beyond the other ones, and you'll end up with a result that you won't really like. They're already going to beat the other plants. You're going to end up with crap paddock with shit quality at the end of it, modern language. So I always look at taking the shortest paddock out. So I'm in a rotation, I've got a couple of options, the season starts firing, right, which paddock is it? And it's usually the shortest one. So shut the gate, just like a crop, shut the gate, let it grow even, let it grow well, and control what you can control. Like this season I had a few options and ended up taking out the biggest paddock I had on the farm, which just because we had an unbelievable November, I was probably never going to get that opportunity again. So that was my paddock, and in another year I might have had 3 smaller ones and then take 3 or take 2 or take 1. You just got to weigh it up. You need to have, I believe, probably 10% of your farm shut up at least, otherwise you're wasting your time, and in a really good season up to 30%, so around those sort of numbers. Stay in control, absolute key. If you're losing control, shut up another paddock, keep going hard at it. Like it's, yes, we're trying to not take down residuals and that, but you've got to be really aggressive to get a rotational grazing system going. Like, she's roll the sleeves up, be really assertive. You're not there to be namby-pampering. It's a big deal. Yeah, again, don't take a paddock out that's fully grazed. End result won't be favourable. So, covering that, how my 2021 planned out. So as I said, we had unbelievable growth in November. Ended up taking the biggest paddock out, and away she went. So we had a bit of a brief about how it happened. So we shut the paddock up. Plan is to not graze it until January. So we got to January, I weaned lambs onto it. There was beautiful clover and stuff through it. There was not a lot of great lamb feed, but there was enough good lamb feed for them to go and take a pick out of it. We were still, season was going really well, pretty confident about how I was going to go about it, and then it stopped raining. So lambs went out, they went on to their rotation. It gave them a chance to do their lamb rotation to start going, and then I put production cattle on. So those, I was talking about those cattle I have, they're second class citizens, the rising 3-year-old cattle ready to fatten, they all went into that. It was grass like that. They sat there and just lived the dream, really. Really interesting how they grazed the paddock. So they're really lightly stocked and they grazed the patches. And obviously there was some areas in that paddock that were really high quality, and they grazed them right down. And as they started getting on top of those good areas, they started opening up other areas. Still no rain. We're into February, and everyone's starting to panic a little bit. So I'm still going pretty good. Those R3 cattle all killed end of February, done and dusted. I've been putting on tail ewes, so the ewes are basically held back. They're not priority stock. So as they started developing a bit of a tail, I just started taking them out and putting them in that deferred paddock. They came out of there, picked themselves up from their weaning, back into the ewe mob. Still no rain. Getting a bit tough. So I shut that paddock up for another month. Nothing in there. Held everything back, handbrake on. We were getting heavy dews, and that paddock just responded again. It was just amazing, and it's because it's got the root depth, it's got the resting, everything's ticking along. 1st of April, hoggets in there, and the tops of my male lambs, because I weather everything so they can. It's really important to be able to box lambs up. If you've got crypt orchids, you just can't do it. So weather lambs are my go-to. I can reduce my amount of mobs and increase the mob size. So they're all in there, and the hoggets are absolutely flying. Male lambs are flying. The rest of the lambs tightened up. And I suppose the next move is as soon as we get rain, which basically, well, it's got to rain sooner or later. As soon as I get rain, I'm on the attack mode on it. So if I'd got rain in January and February, I would have been straight into that deferred paddock, nailed it out, brought it back into production, and away we go. So that's my trigger, is that I have to get rain to be able to be aggressive. If I don't get rain, I'm passive. So yeah, if the season had been different, would have totally brought that paddock back into production. But while I was doing that, so I would have had 80% of my stock in that paddock for a month, which would have allowed the rest of the farm to grow a heap of grass where it was shorter, grow more quality. So that's the first reason for having that deferred paddock. That was option A, but because it didn't rain, I had to go to option B. This is what I like about the system, is you've got so many options, but you've got to know all the options you have, and you've got levers, you've got buttons. Just keep working, because that's a great thing. There's just so many options. Years ago, I had a mate. I don't think you mind me saying, like Nato Luke, and he was way ahead of his time. He would have been a great regenerative farmer. He's up south of Auckland, running a big place up there. But he was big on this deferred grazing when we were in discussion groups, in our late 20s. And he went and managed a farm out on the coast in Hawke's Bay. Never been out on the coast before. Had a reasonable spring, shut a third of the farm up, just like what we're doing, rotation deferred grazing. He wasn't rotationally grazing, but he just condensed everything up to maintain the quality, got all the production off 2/3 of the farm that was expected, and shut a third of it up. And similar to this season, went really dry, and he fattened cattle right the way through the season and laughed at everyone else basically, and everyone sort of thought he'd fluked it. I rang him up the other day to talk about what I was going to do here, and I said, so what did you do? Did you fluke it, or what happened? Turns out he micromanaged the hell out of it. He had cages in every single paddock from August onwards, so he knew how much that farm was growing every day. So he absolutely didn't fluke it. He was just right on the money. Had he been rotationally grazing, he wouldn't have needed those cages. He would have seen the grass growth, which I think is the huge advantage of rotationally grazing. Everything's in front of you. I know that a lot of people measure and stuff. I don't think I've ever done a feed budget. I don't think I've ever measured grass. But I think I've always had a pretty good handle on what's going on. And I think the rotational grazing, I don't think there's any need for it. It's all right in front of you. If you can't see it growing grass, then you haven't opened your eyes. So it's really easy. I suppose knowing what I know, it's probably second nature to me. But if you're going onto a farm for the first time, I think the measuring thing's a good idea. But if you've been on that farm for 3 years, you should really have a good handle on it and be able to know what's going on. Drivers for rotation grazing is be confident but not arrogant, and it's probably like anything in life. Like if you're doing something well, you're usually confident. The day you become arrogant about it is probably the day before you fail. Reading the season, having a mentor. So when things are going bad, you've got someone to go and say, like, how do I get out of this? What do I do next? But more importantly than a mentor is to have a buddy. To have a guy that's doing something similar to you that you can bounce ideas off, that you can ask the dumbest questions or tell him your worst failures without being embarrassed. And you'll probably find he's doing the same, or he's had a season similar to that a few years ago, and you can just bounce off each other. And I'm talking every week to my buddy. And if I'm not talking to him once a week, I'm talking 2 or 3 times a week. It's just so important. It gives you confidence, just huge. The other really important thing, and I go back to that 3-legged stool, is the stock. You've got to make sure you've got the right stock for your system, for your environment, the right classes of stock, the right ratio of stock, and the right breeding program if that's what you're doing. Like, it's just so important. I try and have sheep, and talked about it in the regen space before, is having an 8 and 5. So an animal that outperforms its visual appearance. A ewe that's 65 kilos that can smash out 35 kilo lambs. It doesn't matter what system you do, that it won't beat that. The challenges around rotational grazing, deferred grazing, there's probably the 2 main ones. Tupping and lambing. Around tupping time, you might have to have 3 or 4 mobs. You can simplify it, you can just have one class, but I think that has its problems. And obviously lambing, you've got to spread everything out for lambing. I try and basically 40-day-old lambs I start mobbing up, shed everything out.
40 or 14?
40, yeah, 40 days, yeah. So they're old enough to handle it and slowly mob them up. I don't just chuck everything in at once. Like just put those 2 paddocks together, and then those 4, dunk, and then they get used to it, and then once they're in, you're away. So if you're interested in getting into it, like that, it is a really complicated subject, and you've got to know what you're doing. So, but there's plenty of guys out there to talk to. Like, I'm pretty open about different systems and how to attack it. And it's just exciting. It's reinvigorated my passion for farming. It's just been awesome. Going ahead for us, it'd be nice to have more land. I think everyone's probably in that boat. But realistically, just making our farm viable. We're always on the lookout for land. Being a rural professional is pretty exciting. Love going out and helping people, helping others, and maybe one day we might get into stud stock as a way of increasing its viability, but who knows. But so that's what I've been doing. That's my sort of journey. So thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Righto. Thanks, guys. It took me years to get my head around the whole grazing thing, albeit I'd come pretty fresh as a farmer there. So, and I do find it very difficult to articulate these kind of concepts in a tight period of time. So I think you've done bloody well there. What we're going to do, we'll take a couple of quick specific questions for Guy and that kind of stuff. But if there's anything that's sort of more general that Jules might have an input, Sky's going to park them on a post-it note and we'll bring them back in the panel. So, yeah, any questions? Yep, Andre.
Have you got much in the way of diversity in your soils, or is it mainly grass that you've done?
I've got 10 different species of grass, 4 different legumes, plantain, no chime, and they're all just there. So I've allowed those to grow. It's a big part of my grazing system, and goes back to fertiliser, it goes back to all sorts of things. So
Like do you do regrassing and...
Nope. No, so even through my whole farming career, like hill country farms and that, where it just wasn't able to be done, like I've barely done any cropping in my whole farming career. So it's always been grass systems and how to maximise profit out of that, and I think minimise costs is a huge part of it. So yeah, but yeah, there's certainly my stock don't lack diversity in pasture species. That's for it.
So would you call it native hill country pasture, or
Yep.
is that a...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are you seeing any changes in what's dominant over the last couple of years? Or?
So when I first got there, the first thing that came up was brown top, and I know I'm not allowed to talk about fertiliser and stuff, but
You go for it.
so I basically boast that I grow the best brown top in the country, and I challenge most people on that. But it doesn't seed because the stock can eat it. I've grown palatable brown top, and I know brown top gets a hell of a hard rap, but it is the most nutritious high sugar grass you can get. Leaves ryegrass for dead, but it doesn't grow bulk. So having a component of brown top in your pasture is awesome, as long as it's palatable. And it goes back to obviously your fertiliser regime and stuff. So yeah, having a whole mixture of plants is just as important. So,
What is that fertiliser regime?
basically lime based. Yeah. So what happens is you've got some pasture plants that are aluminium accumulators. So brown top's a great forager of nutrients, but it has a high it doesn't have a high susceptibility to high aluminium levels, so it will take up nutrients. It's got really strong acids that can go into the soil and grab whatever it needs. But because of its affinity with the aluminium, it will taste quite bitter, so the stock don't eat it. So the first plants to start that stock stop eating in the spring is your brown top, and then all of a sudden it seeds up and think, oh, farm's covered in brown top. If it's palatable, it doesn't seed. They actually go after it probably before any other plant. So
What do you
that's a big thing.
measure the bricks of it?
Yep. Yeah, I'm pretty disappointed it's not around 10 most of the time.
And if you want to talk lime and aluminium and that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
to Guy,
yeah,
hit
don't
him
get me started,
hit
you're
him up
being
on the break, because there's a 2-hour lecture there. Couple more quickly before we... Yep.
Locking up like 30% or 10% of the farm, so you've got 12 paddocks, so you lock up 3, if you lock up 1, does that mean you then increase the speed that you're running around the leftover paddocks, or are you break fencing those?
No, I'm not going to break fence anything. It just, again, season dependent. Like, if it's raining, you speed up. If it stops raining, you slow down. You're playing the long game. If you want to try and do a quick, speedy, fatten your lambs really fast and that, like, all power to you, but the season's got to be right for it. So you always think of the long game. Like, if I get a good part of the season, like in that November rain we had, my mind's going, I've just secured my farm for 18 months. Like, if I run out of grass in the next 18 months, it's my fault, it's not the season's. I take full responsibility for what happens, because nature's given me an opportunity. Now, I know a lot of people, when they get a lot of farmers, when they get a good bit of season, they basically take it for everything it's got, and it's gone in 6 months, and they'll bank the money or do whatever, that's fine. But don't whinge when it doesn't rain. Like, it really annoyed me over that last dry period. The amount of farmers that were crying foul when it stopped raining, they kind of had themselves to blame, because most of Hawke's Bay had a fantastic spring, and yet they were screaming by April. Like, it hadn't rained for 3 or 4 months, and yeah, it was hot and dry and pretty savage, but they'd deck those pastures, and then they're crying, oh, we need feed, we need this. And yeah, I wasn't too outspoken about it at the time, but I was pretty disappointed in how they were calling it this drought, Karen. It was a dry period, let's be honest. I've been to Australia, I know drought looks like when it hasn't rained for 7 years. Like, you can't go screaming drought if it hasn't rained for 4 months. That's just not fair and positive.
Scott, maybe we'll park a topic for the panel around those kind of like spring covers and residuals, and when we drop out paddocks and bring them in, and what the different things are. We might be able to dive into that with both Guy and Jules, because you didn't touch on so much on what you do on your main platform as opposed to the deferred, so I think it'd be quite cool to touch on. Any more quickly for Guy? Otherwise,
Quick secret on breaking in the door.
How long?
No, that's the break time. Cool. So, just before we grab a cup of tea, and I think there might be some morning tea as well out here too, is I just wanted to park a few questions that are coming up for people before the break, and we'll capture a few more before you go. So, has anyone got kind of any bigger questions that are sitting with them at the moment that they'd like to just park up that we can make sure that we touch on the panel, particularly hill country related, I guess, or sheep and beef related. Yep.
I understand, Guy, do you have a bit of a background in forestry?
Yeah, our family were really early into farm forestry, and my grandfather planted pine trees in the late 60s.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a question about how does that fit into your total systems, and how do you see, what's the vision for that in the future as well?
I don't
Cool.
really like pine trees anymore.
We'll part. Sweet. So we'll go conversation about trees and the future of integrating trees into hill country. Thanks, Dave. Any more? Yep.
Yep. I'm keen for the day to understand regen a lot more. Guy, your system, what would you define regen in your system?
Should we park that?
Yeah,
Jules,
yeah,
both
park
Jules
it.
and Guy can answer that one.
That's great
Cool.
questions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good question. Maybe open up with that one. Any more? Anything that's top of mind for people that they don't want to forget? Cool. Awesome.
Free choice minerals between with diagrams.
Free choice minerals. Cool. Question for both of them. Awesome. Love that. Great. Cool. I suppose as you're having a yarn of the breaks and that kind of stuff, if more questions pop up, feel free to track down me and Sky, or if you can remember them until we come back, I'll collect them, and we'll just make sure that we get through as many as we can. And I think it's really cool to have two perspectives to it all, and at the end of the day we're going to have 5, so keep that coming. 20 minutes for a break, straight. Right. Okay, well let's keep that there for now, and I'm going to kick off with a couple that we've picked up. The first one being, what does regenerative mean in your system? I guess what does that mean to you versus what you were doing different beforehand? So, Guy, if you'd like to take a crack at that first.
Yeah, soil health is a massive driver, like just seeing that increase. You're seeing that soil health increase, and that just driving my farm system is massive. But 3 things that regen mean to me is sustainability, so being able to function year on to year. Resilience, not having to bail out or run into any issues, which sort of is sustainability, and profitability. Everything I do has to make money. What you do, like if you want to be idealistic, that's cool, but reality means most of us have got mortgages. So if you can't drive a profit out of it, then there's no point doing it. And I actually believe that this system I'm in now is far more profitable than the ones I've been in the past. Like we're doing $11-12K a hectare, $1,200 a hectare. So with barely any costs. So I know there's guys doing those numbers with massive costs. I don't know which one I'll pick.
Is that gross or net?
That is gross, yeah.
So what regenerative means to me is that 3-legged stool really, and it's about having increasing measurable improvements in your ecological function, financial returns and your well-being. So there's those 3 elements, and I think that's where the measuring comes in. If we can find ways to measure those things and know that over time they're improving, they might not all be improving at the same rate, But I think that if we're addressing all those things, then we will be attending to the issues that we know are on the table and that we're all needing to deal with.
Awesome, thanks very much. Is this one working as well? Yep. So the next question, so we talked a lot about, well, particularly Guy focused on that deferred grazing and how we manage those areas. We didn't talk so much about kind of what those spring grazing targets and residuals and things and recovery periods might be on our main platform. So not the bit that you're taking out because you've got too much and you want to defer it for a certain purpose, but the bit that you're trying to keep high quality, high performance on. I guess what are you effectively looking for? I mean, it'll be probably a bit different in your different situations and that kind of stuff, but if you can talk to what your targets are and why, and then if there's any follow-up questions on that, we'll pick those up from the audience.
So, pasture palatability is the number one driver. If you start losing quality, like that's, I don't look so much at length or anything, it's maintaining that palatability is absolutely crucial. So I'm trying not to grow graze short, so they're coming out early. If the plants haven't recovered and in a good palatable state, then I can duck into a deferred paddock for a couple of days if I have to, just to lengthen that round out, and that's why it's good to have a couple of 3 paddocks that you're deferred grazing, so you can just jump in there and jump out if you need to carry it around out, or you know there's rain coming. If you start getting too short, you know, and you go below that 10% deferred grazing, then you've got to pull other levers. So I always have a mob of old ewes that remain set stocked. So if I'm getting short, they go ewes with lambs at foot, or wean early. So that's another lever and a trigger I can pull to make sure that I have grass later on, and I keep things ticking over, keep them going forward.
And just to follow up on that, how do you know your pasture's recovered if it's not a set height, for example? It's not 2200, 2500. What's a recovered?
Tips, as long as those tips are fully completed. I don't go too much on leaf stage or anything, but as long as it doesn't look like it's been grazed, like it's just and like every season's different. I don't like measuring the grass because it doesn't measure that, and what's where bricks come in hugely. I was reading something, a bloke who's quite outspoken against Regenerative was talking about bricks the other day, and he said, I don't know why you do bricks. Like, ruminants have the ability to access all the sugars in the grass. Well, they do. Multi-stomach animals have that ability, and it's a survival instinct. But if they have to do that, then their metabolism drops because their body's working harder. So if those sugars are available far easily in that grass, 2 things happen. They put weight on quicker and they don't need as much grass. So bricks is so important in that respect for me, and it's the metabolism of the stock. And again, like having the right stock that can take full advantage of those situations too, without getting too scientific.
Yeah, brilliant. Jules?
What was the actual question?
Sorry.
You covered a lot of topics.
Effectively, on the part of your platform that you're looking to keep vegetative during the growing season, so spring in particular, what are your targets in terms of covers, residuals, recovery, etc. for the stock that you're running?
I'd just say the same as what you said, and we're looking at the grass plant itself and the physiology of the grass plant, and is it recovered, does it have a proper tip on it? And we kind of threw the rule book out, much to Jackie's concern at times this season, and went into covers that anyone would tell you you're never going to have lambs do well on. And they did, and I think part of that comes back to the mineral program we have, and we can talk about that and maybe with another question.
That's actually a great segue into a question here, which is around land performance, particularly when it gets dry. Effectively, and particularly in big mobs. So a lot of these rotation grazing systems, we're seeing mobs of I know there's a couple of farmers that run up to 1,000 ewes with twins, which is there's a lot of animals there and there's a lot of competition. So tips, tricks to keeping up land performance in those kind of situations. Any thoughts?
I think the biggest one is realising that sheep are, like us, social animals, and if you grew up like I did out back a few years old with one teacher school and somebody plonked you in the middle of Tokyo tomorrow, you'd struggle. And that's why I think the slowly taking time to mob ewes and lambs up so that they actually have an adequate amount of time to adjust to a new social scene and just build that slowly. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, I was lucky enough I was managing a farm up in Tikawiti many years ago, early 2000s, and we had a techno bull fattening system on there. It was rural conventional, so we had 30 odd mobs of bulls and mobs of sort of 15 to 20, and a neighbour of mine ran 2 mobs of bulls, and I got a chance to look at his weight gains and stuff one day, and he made us look stupid. And he was doing 10 times less work. So leader follower, so he used to draft off the top ones every month, and they'd go in front of that big mob and get the absolute cream and put on unreal weights, and then they'd go around, and then they'd go off to the works, and then you draft the next lot off. So no different with lambs, and even like if lambs are starting to get a bit shorter, there's too much competition, you can go and draft off your old ewes, and then those lambs get a chance, even in the same mob, to just take off. So just prioritising stock, and there's so many options available. Like even when you draft off, you can do it with lambs, same as that bull system. Have your top lambs, like your replacement new hoggets, you might be getting ready to go to the ram, and then your top cutter male lambs, and it's so good to have weather lambs that you can box up, same with steers and heifers, and as opposed to bulls. The more stock you have the ability to box up, the more you can preferentially feed something in front. So those leader follower mobs are so crucial beyond weaning.
Awesome. I think it's probably a nice segue into the things that you do differently. Why do you do the things that you do differently between you? So I just wonder whether, probably not a straightforward question to answer, but Jules, you're talking about multiple shifts a day. You're going on to quite tall covers with users' names a foot, and that kind of stuff. In context of Guy, different again, still one mob, but going typically on the shorter covers and that kind of stuff. And there are a few other differences. So yeah, if you want to have a crack at touching on why you do what you do different from each other, just to help people understand, I suppose, the importance of context and the intention behind why you do things differently, I guess.
I think the first thing I'd start with is your landscape really determines your management. Because we've got some lovely flats and we've got a little bit of hill country, which is in the process of being fenced. So we've got these great big paddocks. Landscape determines what kind of management you can implement with these, and also what your values are, what your priorities are. It could be that you've got a young family and it's really important that you're home and get to spend time with your kids, or it could be you're a workaholic and you just really want to make this system hum. So getting connected to your values is a big part of that.
Yeah, like I said, we small farm, we both work off farm, and not a lot of small paddocks. So I've got 2 paddocks at home that make up half my farm, and then the other 10 paddocks main paddocks make up where I try and get really serious on the rotation. So yeah, for us it's just time and what works best for us, and obviously like what I'm doing with the soil and that, and making sure all my plants are palatable all year round is basically means I don't have to worry too much about the fences. They go on and evenly graze paddocks, whether hilly or flat or whatever. They seem to cover all the paddock evenly, and I try and get as much density as I can And I like Dick Richardson, did a big talk, and he was a big advocate for really high density, and then he's almost wheeled it back a little bit to sort of roughly where I am now, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, you just got to find out what fits your system and your time constraints and your environment.
That's right. Have you got something else there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is flexibility. And part of why we've gotten to some of the issues we face in our environment and agriculture is we've been really running a recipe. And like any good cook, if you want to go from good to great, I think flexibility and adding your own flavour to it is really important. And there is no right way. And there isn't actually a wrong way. There's either just positive or negative impacts from the action you take. So take the right and wrong out of it and measure the result.
Great, thank you. And then just if anyone's got any questions after that, just throw your hand up and we'll come to that. But if not, I think actually talking about pillability of grass and grazing, like grazing management's not the only tool there. In terms of Jules, we're talking about foliars, using foliars to get bricks up, which is obviously supporting pillability and that kind of stuff. And Guy, you've had a bit of work going on in previous years to assist with that you were talking about. So can you, perhaps there's one question which is, what is the process you go through to decide whether you actually need to put anything into the system? And then two, maybe talking a little bit more about, in your situations, what are the things that you identified were missing that you wanted to address and how you went about it, which you kind of talked a little bit about, Jules, but not so much Guy.
I'll just say a couple of things, and I think diagnostics are key, and that's why I put my integrity soils hat on and look from what we call the 5 M's. So is it mineral, is it microbial function, is it lack of organic matter in the system, is it your management, or is it your mindset? And the mindset is the biggest one to start with, and I think from there it's like what testing are you doing? Are you doing soil tests, are you doing biology tests, are you doing plant tissue tests? And for me, the plant tissue tests are a really big one because that's what the animal's eating. So the soil pretty much is your bank account. You can see what's in your bank account. Your plant tissue is what's coming through those animals. And are they getting what they need? I'm quite a big proponent of minerals, and not perhaps as a long-term solution, but certainly for a short-term solution. And you talk about palatability, and one of the things I've noticed is animals need salt. It's how they make saliva, and it's how their digestive system really works. And I've seen really good results of what you would think is poor pasture by ensuring that there's salt out there for animals. And what I also see correlates with that is the intake of that salt. So it's quite a big part of what we do that I think maybe is a little bit different. Instead of tipping it on the paddock, I think running it through your animals, 90% of what you put through the animals stays in the paddock and it's recycled back through. So it's a really good way of ensuring that animals have what they need, and I kind of equate it to building a house. If you are about to build your house and you don't have all the resources, we know timber is getting a bit scarce in New Zealand, so if you don't have your framing wood, you're never going to end up with a product that has integrity. So having nutrients that animals can perhaps not get from their feed source, but you can provide so that they have the building blocks to really grow well and perform well is important from my perspective.
So you're basically using herbage testing to determine what's not in the plants that the animals need, and therefore so that informs at least part of what you do as far as the animals is concerned.
Yes, and then we'll also look from a biological standpoint as how well is that biology functioning or not functioning, and then what can we do to support the plant to ensure that it's got enough energy to not just grow itself but also to provide and exchange with that soil microbiome. So you're building that function of the system is really what we're looking to do. So plant tissue samples and tests through the part of it.
I'm going to disappoint everyone and say pretty much the same thing. Salt, all year round, non-negotiable. Always got to have salt. It's just, can't stress it anymore. so important. Like plants don't have a requirement for salt, but animals certainly do. So yeah, I feel it's better going through their system. And trace elements, my two big ones at home, cobalt and selenium. And when you actually get to the biological and chemistry of how those two nutrients work, which is about 2 days worth of topics, just the metabolism's crazy on it. My fat Dan buyer, he comes and picks my stock all the time, and he reckons he's never out anyone else, and he's out usually a couple of kilos on mine, and I don't know, I think that's the big driver of it. So yeah, huge.
So the yield will be better.
Yeah. Well, so we'll talk about that 8 and 5 thing. So best thing about what I'm doing now is I go out in the paddock, and there's still heaps of grass there in the stock are all sitting down. Like if you see all your stock sitting down, ruminating, it's the coolest thing. And it's not like they've eaten too much. And I think that's what tricks the buyer a bit, is these lambs come in and they're not bulging full of grass. They haven't tried to stuff their body full of as much feed as they can. They're just eating what they need. So it's that metabolism, and that goes back to breeding too. I select sheep that can convert. So.
Brilliant, cool. Last question before we move on to Simon. Around drenching, and I guess Dilgy touched on it in terms of figure testing, that kind of stuff. I suppose there's maybe 2 questions there. Is what are you observing in terms of the need to drench with these changes that you're making? And 2, perhaps, is there any specific drenches that you are or you're not using for any reason?
I haven't dipped any sheep for 4 years. I haven't drenched the ewes for 4 years. My lambs get 1 drench a year, so that's around maybe March, April. If they're starting to get a bit of a barber's pole burden, I sort of let it run a little bit, and then once I see enough sort of hurting a bit, then I'll drench. What happens with a lamb is that if you drench it at 60 days, when a lamb starts going from milk to grass, and it starts taking on more grass than milk, it will get a worm burden, absolute, no question about it, and they will drop off, no question. And everyone drenches in them, and it's probably the worst thing. Like, I'll be careful what I say, because I don't want to undermine vets, whatever, but I've got pretty resistant sheep, like as resistant as I can get them. If you drench them at 60 days old, they will need a drench at 90 days old, and they will need a drench at 120 days old, they will need a drench at 150 days, 180 days. You won't get away with it. They're just building up some immunity, and then you go and wipe everything out, and they have to start from scratch. So you've got to let them take a hit for the long picture. And same with the ewes, like I'll see them start tailing off a little bit. There'll be a couple of the back end ones that start dropping off a bit. That's cool. I know everyone's got worms. Yep, all good. Sort it out. Do it yourself. They will work it out. And if some drop off, I'd rather they dropped off. I'd rather know which ones they are, and they can get out of my flock. I don't want them on my farm. So I take a really hard line on the drench, and it seems to work for me. I seem to have just as good a sheep as everyone else, if not better. So I see the neighbours, and I know they're drenching all the time. And I've got no dags. I have to run all the hoggets in this weekend to teach the kids how to crutch, because they'll never see me crutch. But they're all clean as a whistle. So, anything gets dirty goes in the bee mob or goes, they don't get tagged.
Selection's a big part of it.
Massive part of it. Just, you've got to be ruthless on it. But if you're picking poor genetics and you're being ruthless, you'll end up with no stock. You've got to make sure you're going after those genetics, and those stud breeders are doing way beyond what they should be required to do. So.
Fantastic. Jules, just quickly, wrap up.
much summed up. The only thing I would add to that is, there were several times, particularly this year, where you're out looking at your lambs and they're just looking a little bit hard. And do they not? And I think, doing the fecal was one of those measurable things. As I showed in my slides, I'm not sure if it really tells you much. But I also know that what's needed is building immunity and building resilience. So the only thing I might add into that is if you see during that period where something is starting to take a bit of a hit, then the question is, what can you do to support that animal system? Is it, something like your roomy mate or your herbal drenches, or what can you do to support an animal the same as you might support your kids if they're looking a little bit under the weather?
Pull the trigger. If the trigger needs pulling, pull
Yeah.
the trigger. Like, I've got drench in the shed. I'm not. I think I've
So do
made.
we.
I made a comment before about being confident but not arrogant. Well, if all your lambs have got worms and you go, no, I won't drench, that's arrogant and you will fall over. Like, you have all these triggers and levers, but you just know when you pull one what the long-term outcome is going to be, and understanding that. So, yep, I had to put nitrogen on. That's okay. But understand that that's probably not the best option long-term, but it might get you out of a hole. Drench your lambs if they need drenching. Don't be dumbass, drench your lambs. But understand that there are negative impacts going forward, and maybe you could get the ones out that don't need drenching and don't drench them, and just drench the ones that are really hurting, and just be a bit more observant. But you've got to be smart. Yeah.
So plan A, and if the weather or the season or your own management or whatever goes against you, always have plan B, and know effectively when to pull, when to put plan B in place and do it for us. Awesome, I think that's... so we're going to have to move on. Are they questions that we can bank for the full panel later on, or are they quite specific?
Just specific to Guy, it's really struggling to see what's regenerative about the system, and also just the deferred grazing without a fence. I mean, I've worked with people a lot in deferred grazing, I love it, but always with a fence in there. And like we said before, the stock will go in there and preferentially eat patches. So I mean, if you keep leaving them in there and you don't get any growth, wouldn't it get to a point where you end up with just really low digestibility, low ME feed, where the stock start dying around the place? Unless you've got enough growth on those good patches to get regrowth, which means your stock are mixing this low bricks regrowth, high digestibility stuff, with the real low digestibility feed that they end up with. I mean, isn't there a great danger that they end up just standing rubbish?
Great question. That paddock, yep, absolutely. So that paddock I've got has got a pH of 7. It's sitting under a lime cliff. They will eat everything in there if I need to. So the plan A was in January, 80% of my stock would have gone there and belted it out in 2 or 3 weeks and got it back into the system. And while they were in there, I was resting other country that they'd been going around, still leaving residuals, but not like going around. So that would get a chance to grow, and then I start kicking my way through into early autumn, going like that. Didn't rain, hold back, drop into low box, and just take it easy and look after that feed, because I'll always have something to stock to eat, and I've got ewes in there in my flock that have a really good ability to turn rough tucker into maintaining their body weight. I don't need to fire them up. I just need to have them have something to eat. So whether that was high quality grass or not, like I'm not putting lambs in there to try and drive production. I'm just holding stock in there. But definitely, if it had rained, I'm in there and I'm belting that out and bringing that back in. But you've got to read your season, so it's all about how you utilise that deferred grazing. I see you looking a bit confused.
Yeah, I was just wondering what else they're eating then.
So my ewes have got a body score of 3.5.
Now what everything else is eating if it's not growing? Like your lambs, what are they eating?
What are they on now?
No, at that time.
When I was deferring the graze.
Yeah, like when you use on that deferred poor quality stuff and everything else isn't growing, then what are those lambs eating?
They've been on grass like minimum that, mainly sort of that, with no rain, they're flying. But I'll shut down half my lambs that I don't need to finish till winter, and they're just in the other big paddock I've got, big steep paddock with scrub and that, plenty of water, they just go in there and survive. I've got sheep that survive with nothing, so it's that 8 and 5 type animal I'm after that can perform under poorer conditions. But I'm always after, like if I can grow quality feed, obviously I'm going to grow quality feed like this, so it goes right back to what I said at the start, was understand what you want your outcomes to be and why you're doing it and how you're going to go forward with it. It's pretty exciting and like, I don't know, whereabouts you live, you?
Just here, sorry.
Maybe
I've
we'll
got an open gate policy if you want to come and have a look. It's,
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Look, sorry, I've been consulting in the UK and Ireland.
Yep.
Back to New Zealand, and just interested to see.
yep, so they might use a lambing 165%, hogs doing usually 110 to the ram. Performance stats would suggest otherwise, so yeah. I'm certainly driving it pretty hard.
If you guys end up having any lunchtime, perhaps come back with any takeaways and next year there. So I hear what you're saying there, Andre, around people getting impressions that you can do things that don't seem logical.
I'll set stop diet on set stopping on deferred graze, and I'm just conscious of what people might take away. I think it's dangerous, but different situations and doesn't work in all situations.
Context is always key. Awesome. Hey, thanks very much, Jules and Guy. Can we have a round of applause for you too? Thank you.